Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on buying a French property and moving to France. My name is Karen Tate. I shall be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance journalist. For the past 25 years, I've been the editor of French Property News magazine, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times in the UK. I'm joined today by our panel of experts who are all keen to answer your questions. Thank you so much to those of you who've already sent in some questions. We've got some great ones there. So before we get stuck into them, though, I shall just pass over to the panelists to introduce themselves. So, Jo, do you want to go first? Joanna.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Joanna Leggett. So I'm one of the family members at Leggett Immobilier. We are a family business of estate agents. We cover the whole of France, and we've got about 650 agents in all different areas. So they've all got local knowledge, and we've got a massive selection of properties from small renovations to huge chateaus and chalets in the Alps. So I hope we can help you.
Oh, thanks, Joanna. And Tracy?
Hi everybody, good evening. My name is Tracy Leonetti. I am a paperwork professional. I've been based in the south of France now for 35 years, and it's my job and that of my team here at LBS to help people like yourselves who are moving, living or creating businesses in France. And it's our job to help you step by step through all the paperwork processes, and I'm looking forward to answering any of your questions this evening.
Thanks, Tracy. And Sharon?
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Sharon Revel. I'm a French mortgage broker. I work for CAFB and look after the international team here. I've been arranging French mortgages for non-residents and expat customers for the last 23 years, always based in France, and we help customers from all over the world. So I look forward to answering your questions this evening.
Thanks, Sharon. And Amanda?
Turn my microphone off. Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm a partner at the Spectrum IFA Group, and we're a firm of financial advisors, and we can help you with tax, wealth planning, and everything to do with money. So thank you for joining, and there's some great questions, and I'm ready to answer them. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. And Paulette?
Hi everybody, my name's Paulette. I'm the manager at Lonomy, which is a health insurance specialist broker company, and also the co-founder and director of Agence AXA International, which is a dedicated English-speaking AXA agency here in France. So anything insurance related, happy to answer all of your questions.
Thanks, Paulette. And Jonathan?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name's Jonathan Watson. I'm a senior trader at Lumon. Lumon is an international payment provider, so we're here to help with the currency payments for the purchase of your French property. I've done the job for 16 years, helped literally thousands of people moving money in and out of France from all over the world. So there's not many situations we haven't covered. So we're here to help, not just hopefully save you a bit of money on the exchange rate, but also with the planning and timing of your exchanges, and just really making sure all those payments go through smoothly. So we're here to give you information today on the French process. Some things we like to do is just find out a little bit more about you, the audience, to try and make the content today as relevant as possible. So audience, you should see a poll on your screen in relation to when you might start to look at property over in France. Of course, buying a property there doesn't happen overnight, so it's just good for us to get a view on where you might be in this process. So it looks like a real spread of people, quite a few out this summer, but also some towards perhaps the back end of the year. So thank you very much, everyone who's answered that poll. And I'm just going to launch our second poll for the evening. There's 3 in total. The second poll, it's all to do with the financial aspect, of course. So buying property doesn't happen overnight, and in the time from the compromis de vente, the initial sales contract, to the acte de vente, you can be looking at around a sort of 3-month period typically in France. So of course exchange rates can change a lot in that period, and there's a few different options which we'll come on to later that you have in terms of locking in a price, and depending on your availability of funds. So thank you very much, everyone who's answered that poll, and looks like some very keen buyers there ready with money to go. So it's quite a good time for both the dollar and the pound against the euro at the moment. So that's something again we may cover later. On the topic of dollars and pounds, and we help clients from all over the world, and the actual French buying process is the same wherever you are from in the world, but there are little nuances depending on where you are with banking and other slight matters, again, which we may come on to. So it looks like a lot of people joining us from the UK, but as I say, we can help clients from all over the world, including America, where it looks like we have some friends from America joining us, and wider Europe as well. So we'll cover as much as we can in the web. But thank you everyone for answering those polls, and back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Jonathan. So we've got a great question to get started with tonight. It's about buying properties, so it's for Joanna. Sarah Rayner Osborne says, what are your tips for narrowing down a search area? I mean, France is huge, isn't it? And it's got so much variety, different culture, lifestyle, scenery, traditions, cities. How on earth do people pinpoint where they want to buy?
Yeah, it is. It's the never-ending question. It's a tricky one. I mean, realistically, it'd be down to budget, because depending on where you are in France and depending what your criteria is. So if you were looking for a large farmhouse, for example, and you're on a really low budget, then you wouldn't be looking in the south of France. You'd probably be looking in the Centre, the Limousin, the Charente, Dordogne areas, where property prices are a little bit cheaper. So first of all, it would be looking at your budget, if you need to get finance, etc., to buy the property. Then obviously the weather, transport links are really important as well. If it's a holiday home and you're going backwards and forwards to the UK, you need to check that the area, has the flights going backwards and forwards. If you're traveling with pets, you can be driving there all the time. You'll have, how long do you want to do the drive once you get over into France? So there's lots of different things to look at. Obviously, another thing is the weather, because the weather changes. I mean, you might want to be skiing in the Alps, but you might want to be down in the south of France. So all of those sort of things. My biggest tip would be to, if you want countryside, the countryside is beautiful all over France in any of the areas. So I would pick a city that you like and sort of draw a half an hour circle around that, so that you've got hospitals and anything that you need from a city, amenities close by, and then draw half an hour circle and sort of do as many recce trips as you can to go out and have a look at that area. If you've never been to France before, then do as much research as you can online. Have a look at the areas. There's so much tourist information online as well, and possibly do it that way. But yeah, location is massively important. And the other little tip I'd say is to go and visit in the winter on the area you're choosing and buying, particularly if it's a permanent home, because then you'll be able to see if people actually live and work there throughout the winter months as well, and it's not just huge influx of tourists and then nothing's open in the winter. So a good idea or a good tip would be to look in the winter months as well.
Thanks, Joanna. That's great advice. That should help Sarah get started. A question for Tracy now. I say a question. We've got a few questions about visas that are all sort of quite similar, that cross over. So Robin Cameling in the USA says he'd like you to talk about the VLSTS visitor visa created for people who can support themselves without needing to earn in France. Natalie Pipworth in the UK wants to know, how difficult is it as a UK resident to get a long-term visa to live in France, and how long does the process take? And Stephanie Garcia in the US would like to know what's the best way to start the process. So they're all linked to the long stay visitor visa.
Okay, yeah, excellent. Yeah, that's good to group those all together. So let's just have a look at it. So the long stay visitors visa is exactly aimed at people who are inactive. So it's people who want to come to France permanently but not have any activity. So it doesn't necessarily mean just retired people. It is people who are inactive from a business or work scenario. So age doesn't matter. It's about what you are doing. That's the first thing. From a process perspective, the process itself can, depending where you're applying from, because obviously I think there's the USA and there's UK as well. So depending where you're applying from, the process itself from A to Z could take about 3 months. So you have to plan that in. It's a 5-step process. So basically step 1 will be obviously your application, which is done online. Your second step will be getting your appointment in place at the appropriate visa centre. So it's TLS at the moment, both for the USA and for the UK. And that alone can take, you know, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, depending on availability for appointments. Then he's going to the appointment with all of your evidence for your file, where you hand over your passport. And then step 4, of course, once you get your visa, you're going to travel to France within 2 months of getting your visa. And step 5 in France, a step not to be forgotten, is the validation of the visa, which triggers the immigration process behind the scenes. So all of that, like I say, can take anything from 2 to 3 months, depending on how quick you are on the process, depending on delays and backlogs at the visa centres. I think it's important to mention here as well that the validation immigration side of things behind the scenes is important, as I said, because otherwise, when it gets to the renewal stage, if you haven't done that validation, then the renewal is compromised, okay? So where to start? I would suggest reaching out to me directly. I've been doing visas for Americans and for British, for all nationalities that are non-European for the past 15 years. So I do have huge amounts of experience in this domain, along with the rest of my team. So you can start off by reaching out to us. We'll get you to fill in a background information sheet, and based on that, we'll assess the situation and then decide which is the right visa to go through with you and for you.
Lovely, thanks, Tracy. So a tax question for Amanda now, a couple of tax questions, in fact. James Tooney in the USA says, what taxes can I expect to pay when purchasing real estate in France? And what taxes can I expect to pay annually? And Lindsay Agnes in the UK says, what taxes do we have to pay each month? So it's for taxes to buy a property, and annual and monthly taxes, regular taxes.
Okay, so I'll start off with the sort of tax to buy a property. So that does depend on the department you're in, okay, and whether you're buying an older property, whether you're buying off plan, whether you're buying a new property. So if we assume you're buying an older property, it's around about 5.8%, but your notaire or your Leggett agent will be able to advise you exactly what that is for the department that you're in. That's a one-off. If we start looking at what you would be paying annually, that would be your tax foncier. So let's say that you're, where are you? You're from the US. Okay, so I'm not quite sure what that would relate to, but if you're in the UK, it would be like the old poll tax or rates, or that shows my age, doesn't it? And the tax foncier is payable because you own the property. So it doesn't matter whether you live there as all year round or whether it's a holiday home, you still have to pay that tax foncier, and you can elect to pay that monthly. So that's the thing that you'll be paying on that. One of the things I have noticed recently is the waste or rubbish collection. So, for example, we now have to pay a fee in our commune for some rubbish bags, because they're trying to reduce the amount that we're wasting. And if we use those, we have to buy more. And then if we go to the tip, then we have to pay for a card, and we're allowed so many visits. And if you want to use it, then you have to pay extra. So those are the things, you know, to bear in mind. And then the last one was, what taxes do I pay each month? So again, it would be your tax foncier. And then if you're living permanently in France, then it would be income tax. Is that okay? Oh, you're on mute, Karen.
Yes, we've got some new software and I couldn't find the unmute button. Apologies for that, everyone. Thanks, Amanda. That's great. So that were related to the property taxes that people pay when they're buying a property or owning a property. So our next question is one for Paulette. It sounds quite simple, but I know there's a lot behind it. Colin Nuttall in the UK is asking if you could cover health cover simply explained, is what he's put. So good luck.
Yeah. How long have I got? I've got about 2 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, the health system in France, kind of once you get used to it and once you're in it, it's not too complicated, but I'll try and give a little bit of a simple overview in 2 to 3 minutes. So you need to think of the health service in France as it's kind of like a two-layer system. So it's not free at point of access. You're going to get some of the cost when you say, for example, you go to the doctors, you're going to pay 30 euros to go to see the doctor. You're going to get some of that back from the state, from Social Security, and then you're going to get the rest back from a mutual health insurance top-up. Generally, subsidies from Social Security at about 70%. There's many exceptions, but let's just use 70% for like routine doctor visits, 80% for public hospital stays, and prescriptions. It depends. There's different colour codes, different colour labels on prescriptions, on medication, and it depends what colour it is as to what percentage you get back. For example, like antibiotics would be, you get a high percentage back, but a cough medicine, just to make you a little bit more comfortable, you wouldn't get as much back. So, you know, it depends on what the medication is. The mutual health insurance top-up will cover the difference. Now, the difference can be much more. Say, for example, if you go and see like a high level, there's different levels of doctors and consultants. So where we say 17%, 70%, that's of kind of what the state has said, that's the cost of that treatment. So if you go and see the top heart surgeon in the country, he's probably going to charge more than that. So that's where there's different levels of mutual top-up. But again, I could spend about half an hour explaining those as well. Kind of golden rules for the system is once you're in the system, you get a green card. That's called a carte vitale. And that basically triggers the refund system. So to give you an example, I go and see my doctor, I give him my carte vitale, he puts in his little machine. I write him a check. France still likes checks. And so I write him a check for 30 euros. And that kind of triggers the whole refund system. And usually within 3 days or so, I've got the 70% back from the state. And a couple of days later, because the state then talks to my mutual and triggers it and tells it that it's what it's paid, and my mutual pays the difference. So it kind of automates the system a little bit. A thing to think of is when you go to see, say, for example, if I go for a blood test, I don't necessarily pay. Now, the system does keep a few euros back for the system. So say, for example, I haven't paid that. It is capped at 50 euros a year. And if you constantly go for the treatment or blood tests and things like that, where you're not actually paying up front, it's still taking that couple of euros for each one. So suddenly then when you do pay for something and you think, oh, I'm going to get a big refund back, you know, I'm going to get the refund back, it takes all of the 2 euros that have been building up. So sometimes you could be like, hang on a minute, I didn't get any refund, but it's because it's the 2 euros for the what seems like free treatment have kind of built up. So that can confuse people. Once you're in the system, you need to declare what's called a médecin traitant. So basically you declare who's your main doctor. If you can go and see any doctor in France, but if you go and see a doctor that's not your médecin traitant, instead of getting 70% refund, you'll only get 30% refund. There are some exceptions for treatment. There's it's really good that it's called affection longue durée, ALD. So for any chronic illnesses like type 1 diabetes, certain heart conditions, treatment for that is covered 100% by the state. For glasses and dental, you don't get as much back. 70% really doesn't count for optical and dental, but there's a scheme called 100% santé where there's, if you go to the opticians, there's say like a range of frames where there's a really, really good refund for those, or they can cost you barely anything. However, if you want designer glasses and things like that, you know, they're not going to be in the 100% santé range. I think that's probably the quickest I can explain it, but it's kind of, it's once you're in the system, it's like a well-oiled machine, and generally it works quite well. And we're always there to, you can, if you get, say if you go to you're going to have an operation, or you go to the dentist, things like that, they will give you a quote of how much it's going to cost, and you can run it past your mutual to say how much will I get back, and they'll tell you how much you'll get back from the state and how much you'll get back from the mutual. So you can kind of choose whether you want, say like with a crown, if you want a ceramic crown or a gold crown, or you know, so you can decide before you have to pay out for the treatment.
Thanks, Paulette. That was a really good overview. And France has got a really good health system, haven't they? Although, absolutely, you know, first getting used to the system of how much is paid back, how much, you know, you pay yourself can be a little confusing. But I mean, My sister's recently had a hip replacement in the UK. A friend in France has had the same done. The friend in France has had a nurse visiting her every couple of days to check the dressing and all that, visiting her at home. My sister actually had it done on private health through work, and she certainly didn't get home visits. So it was interesting to compare. Massive difference.
Yeah, there really is a big difference.
Okay, great. So thanks. Let us have a look now at some financing questions. One for Sharon from Tony Porter in the UK. He would like to know how he could part pay for a French property using a mortgage, and can he use his pension to pay the monthly payments?
There are two parts really to the question, so I'll try and answer them as clearly as possible. When you say part pay, I'm presuming that somebody else is maybe buying the property with you, and maybe you're splitting how you're going to pay for it, and you want to part pay your part of the property purchase with a mortgage. If that's the case and you're buying in your personal names, we will actually need to have everybody on the mortgage or consent to the mortgage, because the lenders will take a legal charge on the property and they will have to have access to the full amount of the property to have their legal charge. So either you would need to purchase in division, i.e. you're both purchasing your part of the property, and then the second person consent to the mortgage, or you would need to buy via a company structure, but that would limit the number of banks that would be able to work for you. If you're just wanting to like have a down payment and borrow 50% of the mortgage and it's quite a simple structure, that's possible as well. So if you're buying like the full amount of property, you're buying the property on your own and you want to put down a large deposit, say 50-60%, that is possible, providing we meet the minimum lending amount with the banks, which is at the moment is around 100,000 euros. So that's possible. Whether you can pay for your mortgage with your pension, yes, it doesn't really matter where your money comes from as long as you pay it. However, the banks will look at the affordability of the mortgage and they will look to see that you meet the French lending criteria. So if you are on a pension, they will be looking to ensure that your monthly debt-related outgoings, so the new French mortgage and any existing financial commitments that you may have, such as rent, existing mortgages, loans, minimum credit card payments, etc., those cannot be any more than 35% of your income. So if your pension income is sufficient to cover that, then yes, you can get a mortgage using your pension. Afterwards, we have to be careful on age as well, because the maximum age on a French mortgage has to be finished by your 75th birthday. So if you're already 65, then we'll be keeping the mortgage. I can't remember what the retirement ages are in the UK anymore. It changes all the time, sorry. But if you're 65 and retired, then the mortgage duration will be limited to 10 years. So that's going to impact affordability for you too. If you're 70, then we wouldn't be able to get a mortgage because the minimum mortgage duration would be 6 or 7 years generally. So if you would like to have, it sounds like you've got quite a few different variables in your situation. So it'd be probably better to have a discussion and try and get your answers so I can answer question properly.
Thanks, Sharon. And just checking that I've understood that correctly. You're saying there's a minimum lending requirement, was it 100,000 euros? So you couldn't say just want to get a mortgage for 50,000 euros on a property. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes and no. It's more complicated than that. The actual minimum is a lot lower. But in reality, at the moment, because of something we call the taux d'usure, which is the usury rate, it means that smaller mortgages are much harder to get. The usury rate is the maximum an APRC, so the TAEG, can be, and that's set by the Banque de France. It's set every quarter, and it's based on the average interest rates for the 3 months prior. So they set the usury rate for mortgages of up to 10 years, between 10 and 20 years, and over 20 years. So if we're sticking to an under 10-year mortgage, the usury rate is very low, but as you get older, things such as your life insurance gets more expensive, and fixed costs such as the lender's arrangement fees, the cost of registering the mortgage legal charge, are going to represent a greater percentage on a smaller mortgage than on a larger mortgage. So it's mathematical calculation. It's nothing to do with lending criteria, but it's a typical French fancy piece of red tape, basically. So that's the answer. It really depends on how old you are. But we do arrange mortgages for 60, 70, 80,000. But as a rule of thumb, we know that if we're going to go under 100,000, customers need to kind of be under 40 at the moment.
That's a good general rule of thumb. And of course, if people have got any questions, more specific questions on that, they can get in touch with you after the webinar. Okay, so let's move on to a currency question for Jonathan. What are the advantages of a currency company over the bank? And do people need a French bank account to buy currency for their French property?
Okay, good question. And the answer to that is a firm no, you don't. We can offer a wallet. One of the first things you do when you're dealing with Lumen is to register. It's totally free of charge. And you actually immediately get access to what's called a Euro client account. We call it a wallet. Now that actually allows you to make your initial payments for the property. So it, any other costs or charges you might face in France, you can actually use the Lumen account to do. And it's generally a lot easier, that wallet, because you can open a French bank when you're buying a property from living overseas, but then you'll need to wait until the acte de vente, it's actually signed off before you can then open the French bank. We do actually work with some banking partners where you can open at the compromis de vente, the exchange, if you like, the deposit stage earlier in the process, which can be very, very useful. But yes, if you've got a French bank and you're putting money in it, you've then got to get it to the notaire. So you're sort of adding an extra step in the process. And certainly if you're talking about larger amounts of money, a bit like banks in the UK and the US, you might have to book an appointment, or you might have to actually go into the bank, or you might be fiddling around with French online banking, trying to deposit or larger amount across. So it's much easier to use us, and we're certainly recommended for that purpose to have this wallet where you can make your payments direct. So you do still want to have a French bank account open. You'll have your utilities, you'll have insurance and other matters that you might need to actually have a French bank account open for, but you don't actually need it to buy the property. So hopefully that's a answer there. And this wallet that you have with Lumon, you don't use it just to make those payments. You can actually use it similar to a bank in terms of sort of purchasing currency and then holding it until it's needed. We mentioned earlier how, of course, buying the property doesn't happen overnight. You're going to have some time between making your deposit payment and your final payment. Exchange rates are going to change in that period, and you can actually use the wallet to buy currency at a time that suits you. So if the rate suddenly goes up, if it was dropping, if you were concerned, if you wanted a bit of peace of mind over your costs, you could purchase euros in the wallet. You've paid for them, you've bought them at that rate, so it's all locked in, and then they just sit there, and then you can make payments directly to the notaire. So short answer, no, you don't need a French account open to buy a property there. We can help you to do that if you want to, but you can use this wallet that we offer, and it's a much simpler process.
Lovely, thanks Jonathan, that sounds great. Another buying question for Joanna now. Elaine Desmond in Ireland says, where do I start in finding a house in France? I mean, there's a lot more different ways to find properties these days than when you had to go over to France and go into an estate agent and look at some printed out details. It can be quite confusing. What would your advice be?
Well, obviously, it'd be to look on the Leggett Immobilier website, where we have over 6,000 properties. So I would start there for a start. But yeah, there's lots of French portals that you can have a look on that sell property, international portals as well. That would be the best place to start, because these days everything is online. 90% of searches are made online. Once you find a property online that you like, you can talk directly with the agents, particularly with us. We could do video calls, what's up around the building, etc., etc., so that all your preparation work is done before you actually arrive in France. And that saves a lot of time, you know, with long journeys, or, you know, traveling over and then it's you don't like the property, or it's too far away, etc., etc. So I would start with looking online, doing all of your research online, speak to your agents, because the agents have been in the property, so they know it. And that's why it's better, generally speaking, to talk to estate agents themselves. So, for example, if you went on Rightmove's a portal, they can't actually give you the information on the house. They'll just forward you on to the estate agent. So, I mean, we're on Rightmove ourselves anyway, but yeah, you can talk to us, you can make put in a question, and then we can give you all the answers. So I would start, sorry, I'm just choking here. I would definitely start looking online, finding your estate agents, and then having a good chat with them.
Thanks, Joanna. Go and have a drink of water now.
I know it's what happened there.
I think it's the heat getting to everyone.
I know we're 36 degrees here at the moment, and it's like it's 7 o'clock at night.
Wow.
Very hot. Yeah.
So Tracy, who's also cooking in France, a question from Jane Aspin in the UK. She says her spouse has a EU passport. She has a UK one. They're looking to buy a home and split their time 75-25 between France and the UK. So how would you advise her?
Okay, so that's a really good question. So the advantage, of course, Jane, of being married to an EU spouse is that you can benefit from the fact that he has that EU passport. So that does allow you to come to France with your husband and not request a visa. It does mean, however, as soon as you come into France and within the first month, you have to reach out online via the ANF website and request a EU spouse residency card. And therein lies a bit of the problem, because it takes a huge amount of time. At the moment, we have huge backlogs with the EU spouse residency cards, because I won't go into the technicalities of the AGREF number and getting the number to be able to log in onto the ANF, but it does cause some complications. And so they can take anything from 6 to 8 months to get your EU residency card. However, when you do get it, of course, it will be a 5-year card and allows you to be able to do work, have a business, and travel obviously back to the UK when you want. So the 75-25, absolutely not a problem, of course, once you have your residency card. Where you may have an issue is when you go into the initial residency card process, because once you're in France with your EU spouse and you make the request and you've spent more than 90 days in France, and it will take longer than 90 days, if you leave France to go back to the UK, to spend time in the UK, when you want to come back, they won't let you back in because you'll have overstayed your time. So you have the 90-day rule until you get your residency card. A workaround for that solution, if travel is important to you, using this 75-25 that you need to be in the UK, is to request a visitor's visa from the UK. So that gives you that 1-year visa in France, so you can still travel, and then of course modify it to an EU spousal card. The important thing to mention there, for those people who are thinking about that way of going about it, is not to mention at the visa centre that you're married to an EU spouse, because if you do mention you're married to an EU spouse, they'll say, oh, you don't need a visa, and kick you out the visa centre. So there are solutions. Reach out to me if you need help with that. But you do have the advantage of moving to France without the visa. But be aware the timelines for your first year will be extremely complicated due to the fact that, you know, the backlogs at the currently at the prefectures. And just a final word on that: when you have an EU spousal visa, what's going to be important as well is the healthcare. So you'll probably need the help of Paulette as well, because we're finding more and more they're asking for the private healthcare for the non-EU spouse for that first year, because of course, generally speaking, the EU spouse, he can get away with using his, you know, his GE, or he can attach to the French healthcare system rapidly, but the non-EU spouse can't. So you will have to get some private healthcare as well. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Tracy. So a question for Amanda now from Lindsay Agnes in the UK. She would like to know, what are the inheritance rules for a holiday home in France? Okay. So, I mean, that relates to law and to tax, doesn't it?
Yeah. So if we have a little, the easiest way to look at it, if anything that's bricks and mortar, that has to be taxed where that bricks and mortar is, because you can't move it. So it will be inheritance tax of France. Now, the good thing is that there's no inheritance tax between spouses. So if Lindsay has a civil partnership, or she has, or she's married, then she can leave the house to her spouse, and there'll be no French inheritance tax. And then the really interesting thing is, in France, it's the beneficiary that is subject to the inheritance tax, and what rate is applied, whereas in the UK and other European countries, it's the estate that pays for it. So it does depend on who you want to leave that to, and there are some generous allowances depending on the relationship. So, for example, if Lindsay wants to leave it, if she's got children, she could leave it to divided by each children. If she's got 4 children, then she could leave them the first €400,000. There wouldn't be any death duties. So anything to do with inheritance tax, and whenever you're buying a property, you do need to go and see a notaire, because you do need to make a will, and they'll be able to explain all of this to you. But this is a notaire question. But yeah, it would be France that would tax, and under the French rules.
Thanks, Amanda. So obviously, she's living in the UK, but she's still being taxed on that property in France, and she really needs to look into, if she's not married, whether she needs to be married, if she wants to leave it to her spouse, and who she wants to leave it to. The different
Absolutely.
the different rules in France relate to the tax too.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that there is a double taxation treaty in place between France and the UK, so it's not going to be taxed twice.
That's great. Thanks very much, Amanda. As with all our questions, it's never a simple question. It's a complicated one that could take the whole of the webinar time, but we need to move on. So let's look at one for Paulette now, from Irene Blackhall in the UK. She says, do we need additional insurance cover until our S1 forms are fully registered? And I presume that is healthcare insurance.
Yes, that's a really good question. And I think it's something that people need to remember when you're applying for your visa, is the S1 is the health insurance requirement. You don't need to take an additional health insurance policy to accompany the visa. Your S1 it will cover that. However, the day you arrive in France, I very much doubt you're going to go and register to get your social security number. You've just arrived in France, you're unpacking the car, you're doing everything. So I very much doubt that you're going to apply. And even if you did apply on day 1, you're not going to get your social security number on day 2. This is normally where Tracy laughs when I say it takes 3 months, maybe 6 months to get your social security number. You need to be patient and just look at the nice blue sky in France and think it will happen. So what does happen when you first arrive in France if you have an accident or emergency? There are standalone policies that you can take, and they are much cheaper than a visa health insurance cover, because you've got the stuff running in the background. So I would very much recommend at least an accident and emergency policy. We did unfortunately have a client once who was run over on a zebra crossing on day 2 when she'd arrived in France. Luckily, the policy kicked in and paid all of the hospital treatment for her. So that was quite good that she'd put that in place. You can get a more comprehensive policy that will cover more, but generally I would say the accident and emergency one is much better. If you've got pre-existing medical conditions, you might find if you fill in a medical questionnaire, it might be refused. However, as we're a broker, we've got access to lots and lots of different insurance companies. Some of them don't have a medical questionnaire, so you're guaranteed that you'll get the cover, but it won't cover pre-existing conditions. The fact that it hasn't asked about them doesn't mean to say it will cover them. But there's policies then. Obviously, if you get run over on a zebra crossing, it's not a pre-existing medical condition, is it? So it will cover for an accident and emergency. So yes, the short answer is get something that's going to cover for like those serious things.
Thanks,
That's a nice
Paulette.
cheery subject, isn't it?
Well, I missed quite a lot of it because I somehow managed to exit completely the webinar. As I said, new software, but I am back ready to answer another question. This time we have one for Sharon from Stephen McCraith, who's in France. Doesn't sound a very French name, but he says, as a new resident to France with cash and pension and newly set up SAL, which is a sort of business, isn't it? And no business history in France. What loan options are available to him?
So I think it's the heat and zebra crossings. I'm going to try and answer this. The heat's driving me mad at the moment. If you're newly set up as a silent company and have your income only, well, you have your pension income as well. If you're going to need the income from the company that you have to be able to afford the mortgage, then we won't be able to use that income until you have at least 3 years company accounts and tax returns. Sometimes you can get by with 2 years depending on what area of business you're in, but generally it's a 3-year average that we will take of your personal income derived from the company. So if your pension income isn't sufficient to get the mortgage, you would need to wait for 3 years until we're able to use your company income. Can you remind me the rest of the question, Karen? Sorry, I'm completely disturbed by the zebra crossing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. So he wanted to know basically what his loan options were available. He's got cash and a pension and a newly set up SAL. So he's a new business owner in France. With cash
so as I said, as a new business owner, you would, if you need to use the income from the French business, then you would need to wait for 3 years. If the affordability is fine just on your pension, then we can get you the mortgage now based on your pension income, providing you meet the 35% debt to income ratio, which I explained earlier. Your income would be coming from abroad and you're not yet a French taxpayer. You would be considered still as a non-resident in terms of the mortgage conditions. So that would be basically a slightly higher interest rate, more down payment required, etc. If once you've done your French tax return and you have the income showing on your French tax return, some banks will then consider you as well, you are a fiscal French resident, but then you would be able to get better conditions for the mortgage as well. So it might be worth waiting until you have done your French tax return and looking at more detail of your situation to see what's possible now, whether it would be best to wait for 3 years. To really answer your question, it's quite complicated to answer it just on the basic information.
But as before, people can get in touch with any of our panelists afterwards if they want to hear any more detail on any of the questions or other questions. Currency question for Jonathan now. Should I use a forward contract when I buy my euros for the property in France? My friend who bought in the Dordogne last year told me about this. So a forward contract.
Yes, brilliant. It's a really useful tool. I'd definitely say that. I'm sure perhaps my panel would agree. Always just be careful, slightly careful of, my friend did X or Y with their situation, because as I think it's been mentioned, everyone's situation really is quite unique, and what worked for them may not always be best for you. And I think that, as I say, does relate to many matters when you're looking at moving to France. But what is a forward contract? Well, for anyone who doesn't know, it's an agreement to buy currency when you only have to pay for it in the future. So you essentially pay a small deposit now in the rate on, but then you don't actually have to pay it all off until you choose. Typically, people would do it for about 3 months, which covers that sales process time for the French property. Is it good for you, and should you do one? Well, that's really where I come in, and my team. We can have a conversation with you about your availability of funds, your attitudes to risk. It might make a lot of sense if you're on a really tight budget and you really would benefit from peace of mind and certainty of those costs to lock something in. It just makes it a bit smoother ahead. If you want a bit more flexibility and the opportunity to buy it a higher exchange rate if rates do improve, then perhaps the forward contract isn't beneficial for you. Some people might do a forward on part of the money, and then they leave the rest to buy if rates go up, but they're protected if it drops. There's quite a few different ways you can manage it. And when you're talking about, property prices in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of euros, those small differences in the FX rates, we can be talking, many hundreds, thousands of pounds and dollars and other currencies difference on those euros. So it can really make sense to understand those costs, but it is ultimately down to you. If you're maybe selling a property in the UK or the US, you might want to use one of these forward contracts. If you're, waiting on that sale before you can then purchase in France, again, that certainty might be beneficial. Essentially, you're trying to avoid the risk that rates move against you, and that would ultimately make the property more expensive. So again, that peace of mind and certainty can be really beneficial. So yeah, absolutely. It's great that your friend's given you that recommendation, and it is a very, very useful tool, but everyone's situation is quite unique. So always best to have a chat with a specialist.
Thanks, Jonathan. So we've got about 15 minutes left. Let's see if we can get in another question for all of our panelists. Joanna, Neil Tomlins in the UK says, we've seen some properties we are interested in, but won't have the finances for 6 months. Is it still worth making offers now? Very interesting question.
Yes, it's definitely worth making offers now. I've got a vendor up the road at the moment that is looking for buyers, but they can't move for 7 months. So, there's always going to be situations like that. So it's definitely worth finding out. If you do find a house that you really like, the agent can talk to the vendor about the date of moving. If it's not urgent and they have to sell really quickly, you can still sign a compromis de vente, which means you're tied into the property, but you can set a later completion date. So that is always possible. Yeah, I wouldn't worry, providing that you are actually going to have the funds at the date that you set, because otherwise you have to pay a deposit, and then obviously you've got to complete when you say. But yeah, it's definitely worth doing that. I mean, generally speaking, sales can take four months to go through anyway. So, if you put an offer in at this stage, but you're not going to be ready to sign anything, that might be slightly tricky. But if you're prepared to sign the compromis de vente and have a delayed completion, that would definitely work.
Thanks, Joanna. And a question for Tracy now from Lewis Self in the US. He wants to know about remote consulting income from a home in France, how to estimate URSSAF, which is basically French Social Security, isn't it? How to estimate the impact of that now before he moves.
Really good question. Yes, so obviously that would be a liberal visa. So although it's not just French Social Security, when you pay into the URSSAF, you're paying in for, sickness benefits, invalidity. It's not just about just the healthcare side, it's about all the other benefits you get behind it. So how can you determine what you'll be paying? Of course, it will depend largely on what type of business structure you're going to set up. Of course, that's what we do as part of our business setup program. So generally speaking, for consultants, and depending on what revenue you're going to earn, we will ask you the questions, what revenue are you going to earn and things like that. But most people start off with a micro-entreprise, which is the lowest form but the most easiest form of structure, and it allows you to have fixed social contributions, so you can really calculate how much you will pay to URSSAF, and there are no surprises. So the first one, if you're thinking of doing a small business structure, sole trader type activity, you'd be under the BNC as a consultant, and you can already know that your social contributions to URSSAF will be around the 26% mark. It's about 25.6% to be more precise. So you take your turnover, so anything you invoice or your turnover, so you earn 30,000 euros in invoicing, then you can take the, that percentage, the rest about 7,500 euros in social contributions that you will pay on a quarterly basis based on your earnings to the URSSAF. So you can already work that out if you know what your earnings are going to look like. Of course, that does not take into account your income tax. That is really just your social contributions to the URSSAF. And then on top of that, once you do your tax declaration, you can then, you'll benefit from a 34% deduction because you're under the BNC. And that, so the total gross will go on your income tax. You get 34% reduced. You pay tax on the rest. But of course, that's something we can discuss in more detail when you get to that stage. So I did it really quickly because I know we don't have much time.
Thanks, Tracy. No, that was really, really good. Very clear. Amanda, Jeanette Hamill in the UK says, if we keep our business running in the UK but relocate to France, which government do we pay tax to?
Haha, good question. So if you've got a UK company, you'll have to file UK accounts and then you'll have to complete a UK tax return. When you live in France, you have to declare your worldwide income. But the good thing is there's a double taxation treaty between the two. So you'll have to complete 2 tax returns and you won't be taxed twice, but you will have to do both. How about that?
That's very, very swift. So yeah, bad news, you have to do 2 tax returns. Good news, you'll only be taxed once. Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, Amanda. Paulette, Russell Stanley in the UK says, how do you continue prescription medicine when you become resident? I know that's something that worries a lot of people if they're on, you know, a long-term prescription.
Yeah, so I would say stock up if you can. Obviously, there's a limit to how much your doctor will prescribe, and you can get in the UK or the wherever you're moving from. But try and stock up with a few months' worth. When you're in France, you even before you've got a social security number, you can go and see a doctor. You will just pay to see the doctor. And they can give you a prescription called an ordonnance, and you can then go to the pharmacy and get the prescription. You will pay per item, so it's not like if I use the UK for an example, it doesn't matter what the medication costs, you pay the prescription cost. The medication could be like £3, but you're paying the prescription cost. Which I don't know how much prescription costs in the UK anymore. Is it £9 something like that? But if your medication's cheaper, you still pay that, but also if it's more expensive, you still pay the prescription cost. It doesn't work like that in France. It's the cost of the item. And for our US clients, they're usually very, very, very happy with the cost of those medicines when they go to the pharmacy, because it's a lot cheaper than they would be used to paying in the US. So stock up. Once you've applied for your social security number, you can then keep what's called the brown forms. That's not the official name, but everybody Anglophone calls it the brown form because it's a brown form. And then once you've got your social security number, you can actually send that off and get refunded. Yeah, there you go. I'll keep it short. Stock up, but don't worry, you can see a doctor and you can get prescription to get your medication.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paulette. Question now for Sharon from Emoki Molnos in the UK. Says, we have a property on the market in the UK and wanted to get an assumptive mortgage range based on a set of simple assumptions. Can they do that? I'm not sure I even understand the question, but I hope you do.
You kind of can, but the answer is going to only be as good as the information you give. So I would say it's very difficult because French mortgages, the different lenders, they all have different criteria. And when we pre-qualify a customer for a mortgage, we want to give the correct information. So we will ask for documentation and we will look at things as the banks will look at. So if, for example, you say to me, your salary is this much, but it turns out on your payslip or on your official documents, maybe that salary has some allowance in, maybe there's some variables. The reality when you sell your UK property is that you're not going to maybe get the mortgage that you assumed you would be able to get, because we wouldn't be giving you correct information based on information, on concrete information. So it's very, very difficult to make assumptions on what your situation is, because it's only how the paperwork will actually be analysed by the bank, which is why we ask anybody that we pre-qualify to provide us with paperwork so that we can be 100% sure based on looking what the banks would see and how that information will be interpreted. To give you a very clear example, when we deal with people who are self-employed, for example, we ask them what their income is, and they will give me one figure. And when we get the paperwork, it actually turns out the income I can use is very, very different. And it often means that they can borrow a lot less. That causes disappointment, wasted visiting trips, and it isn't really the best situation. So yes, we can try, but the answer is not going to be very, it's not going to be very precise.
Yeah, I thought that was the case. The more information you can give, the better the answer you're going to get. Okay, great. Thanks for explaining that. Time for one last question for Jonathan. How can I find at the best time to make my currency exchange, I've read conflicting views on which way exchange rates are headed. Isn't that always the case?
The $1 million question, no pun intended. But well, no, you will read conflicting views because no one knows exactly what rates are going to do next. I do get many clients asking me, surely you must know, surely someone out there must know. And unfortunately not. The movements in the market are just a reaction to what is happening around the world. And of course, no one can predict the future. Despite that, it doesn't mean you should just bury your head in the sand and say, oh, it'll be what it'll be, because ultimately those movements are going to determine what you end up paying for the property. So to try and help people understand the market, there's a huge amount of resource dedicated to making forecasts. We actually compile research from about 50 different banks looking at all the different forecasts. And actually, when you see all these different forecasts in black and white with these big names in banking, they can't even agree on where rates are headed. But by looking at so many different sources, we can see an average of where the market predictions might be headed, and we can certainly share that with you. We're also extremely proactive. We'll be letting you know what's going on a day-to-day, week-to-week, however much you need, however regularly you need the information, because there is so much going on. We can talk you through it. We don't want to overburden you. We can keep it nice and simple, or we can be more detailed. It's really up to you. But again, it's just that early conversation about what type of information is going to be relevant for you. And ultimately, we'll try and help you make an informed decision that's going to suit you best.
Thanks, Jonathan. That's great. And that brings us to the end of today's webinar. We'll be taking a short break over the summer. We'll be back in September. But in the meantime, if you have any questions at all for our panelists, all their details are on the screen. We'll send you an email about detailing the next webinar, so you can join that. And also there'll be a recording of this webinar, which is really handy if you want to look back at any of the questions, if you missed anything or just want to re-listen to some of the answers. So as I say, thank you for joining us. I'll just hand over to our panelists to say their farewells. So Joanna.
Yes, thanks everyone. And as I mentioned earlier, do have a look at our website. We've got loads of information on there about different areas and properties, etc. And hopefully see you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanna. And Tracy?
So yes, thanks a lot for joining this evening. Have a wonderful summer. We're back in September. In the meantime, you can drop me an email at any time. And on our website, there's lots of free podcasts and information that you can find about moving, living or creating a business in France. Have a great summer.
That's great. That's great, Tracy, even. And Sharon?
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everybody. And thank you all for your questions. Not so easy to answer tonight, but that's why we're also here, because things aren't straightforward. So it's always best to get specialist advice. Have a lovely summer. I think we're going to all be very busy. I know lots of people are coming to look at property over the summer as well. So make the most of it, speak to the professionals, and I hope you have a lovely summer.
Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for your questions. I hope I've answered them as well as I could have done with quite a large, broad subject. Don't hesitate to get in touch if you've got any insurance questions. All of my team are English speakers, mostly native English speakers. So just get in touch and we'd be happy to answer any question at all. And have a lovely summer.
Paulette and Amanda?
Thanks very much for joining us. We've got a whole host of specialists on this panel. Do reach out, because everybody's circumstances are different. On my website, there's some good articles and lots of information. And just get in contact if you've got any queries. So thanks for listening. Have a lovely summer.
Thanks, Amanda. And Jonathan?
Yes, thank you, Karen, for hosting. Thanks to all our panelists, and thank you, audience, for joining us. I'll just echo what everyone else has said about, have a chat with the experts. Like I mentioned before, don't just rely on your friend who told you something, Bob in the boulangerie, or, whoever it might be has given you some information. It might be useful, it might be relevant, but you've got decades of experience here. the French buying process. So have a chat with us. We can explain some other points of view and hopefully set you on your way to your beautiful French home.
Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you to all of you for joining us. And hopefully we'll see you in September after a lovely summer. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.